Hey Dan, what's happening?
Hey Brian, yeah, not too much, not too much. It's my birthday yesterday.
Wow, happy birthday, man.
Yeah, for sure. Turned 39 for the second time.
My goodness, I wish I was that young.
Yeah, I'm not that young anymore. That's for sure. I was going to make an off-color joke just now, but I will leave it for later. So, what I am really excited about coming up here is the Summer Olympics in Paris.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Really excited. I'm very excited for the track and field. It's going to be, some of these events are going to be hotly contested and highly entertaining, especially the sprints. You know, I'm a sprint man from the past, 100-meter guy.
Yeah.
And especially the men's 100, and I think the women's 100 too. And actually, well, all the sprints, but those in particular are going to be hotly contested, and a coin flip. We don't know who's going to win.
Right.
Gone are the days of Usain Bolt.
Yeah,
The Usain Bolt days where it's not who's going to win, it's how much is Bolt going to win by.
Which is good, eh? It's called competitive balance.
Yeah, for sure.
Which makes things much more interesting, I think.
Yeah. Not to say, I mean, I love Bolt. Bolt, you know, when he was competing, like the antics he would do, like when that first started in Beijing, I was, as a track and field guy, I was kind of like, because showboating's not really, it's not tolerated well in track and field.
Sure.
Any kind of boisterous, big personalities at the time were sort of frowned upon. But Bolt really changed the game. He changed the paradigm in that way.
Well, he did it in a nice way, I think. You
Yeah.
know, he wasn't nasty with his antics.
Yeah,
People kind of liked it. Went, oh, wow, that's a cool guy. Plus, he's pretty big. Who's going to argue with him anyway?
I certainly wouldn't. Yeah. And Paris is hosting the games, so I think for the second time now. Is that correct?
And they've been anxious for this for some time now. France has wanted to host another games.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, London's had it 3 times.
That's right.
So there's always that rivalry between cities,
Yeah, and those nations too. The French and the Brits aren't exactly best buddies.
And Los Angeles will get the next one.
That's right.
So that'll bring them up another notch because they've hosted before.
Twice before, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. So this will be number 3.
Yeah. And you know that's actually quite sensible because it leads around to, you know, how do they actually choose the cities, right?
Right. Yeah.
There's a lot of controversy around this over the time. I mean, Rio, for example, was controversial. It's the first time that the Olympics had been held on the South American continent.
That's right. In a third world nation.
In a third world nation, effectively, although Brazil, third world.
Developing nation.
Developing nation.
Yeah.
Traditionally the Olympics gets held either in the North American continent or in Europe.
Right, yeah.
And not many other parts of the world have seen it, other than, say, Australia had a couple of shots at it, and we'll get Brisbane in 2032.
That's right.
It's interesting because I remember when, actually I was very upset when Athens was given the games in 2004.
Yeah,
2004.
2004, yeah.
I didn't think that was good. Not because they don't deserve it, because let's face it, that's the home of the games, right? And that was the emotionally satisfying part to that selection. But there was no way they were ever ready for it.
Certainly not.
And the amount of money they had to spend in order to host them. And then subsequently what's happened, and it's all there on the internet, you can see. And I think the IOC is culpable for a lot of these kinds of decisions. You know, Rio is another one.
Yeah.
It was a good idea, third world or developing country, let's give another continent a go. Yeah, I got all that. And I used to listen to some of those conversations between IOC members discussing about these things.
Yeah.
But none of that made any sense to me because for me, my bag has been about being ready for things.
Right.
You don't give it to people just because they should have it.
Yeah.
You need to give it to people because they're ready to have it.
Yeah.
And the IOC, I think for a long time, thankfully now recognize this, but for a very long time, just used to give the games out almost as favors to whoever an IOC member might have been in that part of the world, like Barcelona's had a couple.
Yeah, okay, I can see that.
Because of Samaranch.
Samaranch, of course, yeah. He was the former head of the IOC, by the way, Juan Antonio Samaranch.
You get these almost like decisions made on personal likes and dislikes rather than on logical facts and data to say, well, no, that's the right city to do this. This is the most appropriate one to do this.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's kind of cool that Paris is one of those that definitely is a good city to do it. as was
Absolutely.
London, as will Los Angeles be, and even to some degree Brisbane. They're all ready now. They already have most of the facilities in place.
Yep. And they've had 2 Commonwealth Games, right?
In Brisbane.
Yeah, they had one back in like 78 or something.
Yeah, a while back, but they have a very strong sporting heritage. And with the more recent Commonwealth Games in Brisbane, they had an opportunity to really put an infrastructure together and demonstrate that they could put all the logistics together, like transport and feeding athletes and doing all those things that people actually don't see.
Right.
And, you know,
We see the venues, right? And we see the competition organization, but the behind the scenes things, not so much.
We only see the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And it all looks wonderful when, for the Olympic Games, for example, 42 sports, 42, 44, I'm not quite sure, I need to look that up. But each of those sports will have an international standard venue.
Right, yeah.
I've argued for many years that the Olympic Games needs to move beyond the original model that was proposed in 1896, because it's not 1896 anymore.
Oh, geez, you know what? By golly, you're right.
I am. I've been around, so I should know.
You remember 1896. What was it like back then?
Well, it was small. The Olympic Games were small.
Certainly, yeah.
There was only a handful of athletes, less than 1,000 athletes, 13 countries.
Yeah.
About 18 sports.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about 10,000 plus athletes, 42 sports in 207 countries. It's like, it's a whole different scale, whole different ball game. And yet this model of having a city hosting it and a city that bids for it is kind of passé, I believe, and I've believed that for some time.
How would you change the current model, the current selection process for cities?
Oh, look, don't get me started on that. I mean, I think the Olympic Games could be a very exciting event if it actually moved away from this model and had. One of the problems with the Olympic Games is this whole concept of inclusivity, right? And the right to participate.
Right.
But that works against the logistics of having to deal with how many thousands of people.
Right.
So if it was truly inclusive, there'd be 30, 40, 50,000 people there, like a World Masters Games might have.
Right, yeah. Those are gigantic. I've had a few friends go to those.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you can't do that for the Olympics because, again, these are held at international standards. And the costs of that and hosting that many people would be prohibitive.
Right. Well, we've seen some of the costs or reported costs from the games and the Winter Games in Sochi in 2014, for example, the Beijing Olympics in 2008 being upwards around $50 billion.
Yeah, ridiculous money.
Yeah, $50 billion.
And I've been involved in some very interesting debates, especially with my friends from Athens, who, to be fair, are still very proud that they hosted the games, and so they should be.
Right. Yeah.
It is their games after all. And it was a great games. At the time, it was really good.
Yep.
They pulled it together really, really well. But sadly for them, if you go to Athens today, more than half of those venues have either been torn down or are no longer in use and are standing there as adding to the ruins that are already there. That's from ancient times.
Yeah,
so,
that's really unfortunate.
It's very unfortunate. But the Athenians would tell you, yes, but hosting the games was really good for us because it made us build new infrastructure in Athens. It's now easy to get across the city.
Right.
All the things. And I'm saying, well, why didn't you just spend the money on that? You didn't need to host the Olympic Games to build a new train line or upgrade your road systems or anything else.
Yeah, I guess you could argue maybe it justified the cost, those expenditures to create the infrastructure
you hear
for
that
transport.
argument, but I've never been convinced by that.
I don't believe that to be true either, but I would think that's what officials would.
Yeah. Well, I think we got carried away with that. Going back to your country, Montreal, that they would have justified hosting the games at exactly that. It'll enable us to build infrastructure, build facilities.
Oh yeah, that was part of the bidding process too.
Yeah.
I've seen the Montreal the documents from the games.
So what happened?
Yeah, well, I mean, the aftermath was, there were all these auspicious ideas about what, modernization of the city and bringing a more cosmopolitan vibe to Montreal, which is already seen as one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world. And I think that part was successful. But in the end, the city was bankrupted. The city was bankrupted, and the games just weren't profitable, as many Olympic Games is the case with many Olympic Games, unfortunately. And that changed in ensuing years and later stagings of the games. But and again, this number is just kind of rough and speculative, I suppose. But I heard that the city lost something like $9 billion, and that's or $7 billion, and that's in 1976.
Which is a lot of money.
That's like
in
20
today's
something
money,
billion, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, we're talking exorbitant costs to host the games, and yes, there are certainly benefits in terms of tourism and infrastructure, but I mean, many of these Olympics, in that sense, are sort of cautionary tales for other nations, and I think, as we've talked about a lot actually, it sort of dissuades city populations and Olympic committees from bidding on the games.
And that's happened. And we've seen the evidence of that with less and less cities every cycle actually putting forward a bid.
Right. And you see public furor, public outcry when the news breaks that Olympic committees are bidding in certain cities, like Boston, for example.
Yeah.
Essentially, the city of Boston kiboshed any stagings of the games there in the near future. The people just said no.
Yeah.
They didn't want it.
It's too expensive.
Too expensive, yeah.
I mean, it's basically a 2-week fun fest of sport
Yep.
that costs you billions and billions of dollars, pounds, or whatever currency you're working in.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the case with pretty much every stagings of the Winter and Summer Olympics except the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this at length too. What they did was they formed a corporation called the LA 84 Foundation. And they structured it like a business with a CEO, vice presidents, and of course putting on a good games and showing the world what America could do was at the forefront, and that was priority one. But turning a profit and leaving a legacy was a close second. And they achieved that in spades.
Yes, and so much so that I saw there's even a proposal made by LA at some stage to become the permanent venue for the Olympic Games.
Is that right?
Well, there's a lot of calls for this because, and everything I'm going to say in this podcast today, I'm going to give the IOC some credit that through their Agenda 2020, that commenced in about 2011, they have been examining this issue and trying to figure out a better way, because clearly the model was breaking down for the reasons that you've talked about.
Yeah.
So let's make sure everyone's clear on that. I'm not trying to criticize the IOC here. Everyone is thinking about these things. In my view, probably not hard enough.
Yeah.
For long enough or more aggressively enough, but maybe we're starting to see some progress now, I think. The problem is if you go to any city except for Los Angeles, although they did at least set the standard for how to set up to an organizing committee, and it did enable future cities, if they so chose to follow the model, to even potentially turn profits.
Right.
But unfortunately, a lot of the subsequent hosts of the games followed the pre-1984 models and went in with their emotions.
Right.
All right. So we have to build the biggest and the best, the most expensive.
Yeah.
Without looking at what you're going to do after the games with these things.
Right.
And the fundamental problem of hosting an Olympic Games in a single city is that you build essentially 42 international standard sports venues that aren't going to get any use after the games.
Yeah.
And certainly not necessarily in the form that you would hope that they would be used, because in addition to building international standard facility, which in itself is a good idea.
Certainly, yeah.
But you build seating, which is never going to get used. All right. For one or two venues, yes, because you can use them as concert venues and convention venues, etc.
Yeah.
But if every one of your big venues has got 10,000 plus seat capacity, who's going to use them?
Right.
Yeah. So you've got all this space that then needs to be maintained, because if you don't use it, whether you use it or don't use it, facilities deteriorate.
Yeah.
And there's some interesting stats around that. My favorite one that I like to talk about with students is if you build a facility then you should be budgeting on capital, 10% of the capital cost of that facility every year.
Right.
It's how much it's going to cost you to maintain that facility.
Yeah.
So that means you have to generate that much income. All right, so do the maths. You build a $100 million facility, that means you have to generate 10 million every year.
That doesn't seem like too
Just.
lofty a task either, though.
Well, but it is,
with the
because
proper
then you've got to
planning.
employ people to do it.
Right.
And so it's not just 10 million you've got to generate, because you'll be employing people and creating, which is good, create jobs and stuff, that's very important. But actually you're probably having to generate about the capital cost every year in reality, because the profit will be the 10 million that you need to
Gross
maintain.
versus net. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So but people haven't factored these things in. So we build the facility, and then after the games we go, and Athens is the worst example, Rio to some degree.
Yeah, Rio for sure.
You know, you see these pictures of their swimming pool, for example. Why can't a swimming pool be useful?
Yeah.
You would think it would be a really nice venue, but they are expensive. In fact, even more than 10% per year to maintain swimming pools. But with some pre-planning thought to convert these facilities into something that gets regular use. It's not just the Olympic Games this is happening, Dan. This happens all over the world in multi-sport events on every continent at every level.
Yeah.
Down to national games, right?
Yeah.
I just visited some facilities in Indonesia. I won't mention the place, the province, but built $500 million worth of facilities, which is a lot of money for them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right? And all of them stand empty.
Jeez.
Right.
And they're not being used at all.
Hardly. Maybe once a week somebody goes in and uses these things.
But there's certainly no profits being generated.
There's
from
nothing
these
being
venues.
generated. And at the
What
end
a
of the
waste.
day,
Wow.
but the attitude is, well, we don't know what to do, so we'll close it. And then at least it'll be preserved.
No.
Because you don't use it, you lose it. It crumbles into the ground. You know? Things start to grow in there and it falls apart.
Yeah.
Myanmar. Oh, if you've been to Naypyidaw, the capital, which in
have not.
itself is an amazing white elephant of a place.
Oh, yeah.
But they built facilities for the Asian Games.
Yeah.
Fabulous facilities. And I walked around those. And they've got this magnificent swimming pool, right? And I wanted to ask I asked if I could go inside and have a look, and said sure. And it's beautiful inside. It's beautiful. There's lots of people cleaning and you know, doing stuff like that.
Yeah.
So how often does it get used? Oh, we have a swimming club comes in, you know, 1 hour a day. Sometimes.
Wow.
It's not used. Just sitting there. Eventually, it'll become too costly to maintain it, because you still have to filter the water.
Right.
You still have to run, you know,
Keep the lights on.
keep the lights on and do all that sort of stuff just to keep it alive.
Yeah.
The swimming pool in this province in Indonesia is the same. It's a beautiful swimming pool.
Yeah.
It's got huge seating. Well, swimming's not a sport that people go and watch.
Yeah.
So they built permanent seating. They've got a swimming and a diving pool, which I think now they've got, to their credit, they've got a youth academy program.
Okay.
Where they've identified a half a dozen swimmers and divers to do a bit of stuff. But what, you justify millions of dollars a facility for that?
It's just such a waste. It makes me sad to hear this.
But it happens all over the place. And there's this commonality in administration from, and well, maybe we could blame the Olympics for this, because they're the ones who have set the model.
Yeah.
Right? This is multi-sport games. It's their thing, right? Everybody else's multi-sport games derived out of the Olympic Games.
Right. Yep.
Right. So if you think, and people can question that if you like, but the fact that every multi-sport games has an opening closing ceremony, well, who was the first to do that? It was the Olympic Games.
Yeah.
They have some kind of a torch.
Yeah.
And they light some kind of flame, or they have a ceremony at the start. Who was the first to do that?
Well, and let's call a spade too. The Olympic Games were the first multi-sport competition in existence in the
Well, at
modern
least in
times.
the modern times.
Yeah,
Yes.
in modern times.
So everyone's kind of followed their lead. And unfortunately, I think they followed their justification for building big facilities for, you know, and of course, sport needs these things. But it gets back to this thing about being ready, doesn't it?
Right.
All right. What's the point like in this, going back to my Indonesian example, they built 2 cricket fields. 2, one for men, one for women.
Oh,
Well, they don't play cricket in this province. So after the games, well, I went there and the grass is like this high.
oh, so it's
They've still got sight screens, they've still got the wicket there, but the grass is this high. No one ever uses it, and it's 2 massive areas of grounds,
Jeez,
and it's just sad.
that is quite really sad. Yeah,
The swimming pool, no one goes. They don't open it.
yeah,
They're worried that it's going to cost too much. Well, it's costing you anyway. You're still having to filter the water.
yeah.
So at least if people were going, you would take some money.
Yeah, and I mean that's where like I think it's a major strength of the 1984 Los Angeles Games, because in like building and maintaining these venues, they actually created more interest in sport at the grassroots level, and had more venues for competitive athletes as well. And of course,
But America has a sport infrastructure for that.
it was already there,
Yeah.
in effect, right?
Yes, exactly.
But the LA84 Foundation had such a surplus after the games that they actually were able to keep the lights on, keep the pool filters going, etc. And
And then turn them into businesses.
exactly right. And those businesses are there to this day. And the LA84 Foundation, I mean, it continues to grow. Its dividends continue to grow every year, and those youth sport programs and venues are part of that legacy.
Yeah.
They're a lasting legacy of those games.
Well, I was a staunch critic of the IOC in those early days when they'd make decisions, because the first question I would ask is, well, what's that city going to do with those facilities after the games?
Yeah.
Do they have the expertise? I mean, there's even another problem, because one of the rationale for hosting the games is that you develop skills in event management.
Yep.
One of the problems with the Olympic movement is you've got this touring event management group that
Yeah.
follows the Olympics around. So actually a large percentage of your workforce that comes and runs the games is not from the country that's hosting.
Oh, is that right?
And so even that argument doesn't hold water anymore.
Yeah.
And of course, once the caravan moves on, facilities empty and no one with expertise how to use it.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
how to run the events, how to use the facility for sport as well as other things.
Do you think there's a remedy for this situation?
Yeah, well, I call it readiness.
Right.
And I think the IOC is moving in this direction, which is now they're only really, according to the Agenda 2020 outcomes, one of the recommendations was that you only consider cities that already have the infrastructure in place.
Right.
So in the past, the bid cities would say, we will build these things,
Yeah.
all right? And then based on the fact that they're promised to build, they were awarded the games,
Yep.
which immediately locked them into these multi-billion-dollar debts, right?
Right. Yeah.
And of course, that was the whole problem.
yeah.
Now, at least they're saying, well, unless you've actually got the things in place already, you can demonstrate that you can right now host an Olympic Games because you've got all the facilities, you've got an infrastructure network.
Yep.
And even I would argue that they should also have the expertise
Right.
in running events and running high-level international events before they're awarded the games for the
Yeah.
first time. And I think that's a big step forward.
Yeah.
I think awarding the games to give people facilities, to enable people to develop expertise, that's passé. We've got to get past that.
Yeah, for sure. And with that expertise, individuals in the area that know how to run these events, you have sustainability too over time, right?
That's right.
And those facilities and maybe for future events as well. Like I was saying, I mean, much of the infrastructure built for LA in '84 exists to this day, and it'll be used for LA 2028.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like mind-boggling to me because it's an aberration in the Greater Olympic movement. No other nation has been able to do this, right?
No, and no other nation actually could say that we should be considered as a permanent venue for the Olympic Games because they
Right.
have everything.
That's a fair point, a
It's a
fair
fair
argument. Yeah.
But I also like the idea that with the Olympic ideal of inclusivity, it should be possible for any city to host the games. Of course, it's not. It's too big.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are very few cities in the world. Interestingly, where we live in China, there's probably a dozen cities that could host the Olympic Games.
Oh yeah.
Even Chengdu here has got enough venues for that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like probably we could probably host 3 Olympic Games here at once.
I reckon.
Yeah.
So China, in terms of its sport facility development, has the infrastructure in place to host these games. But sadly, and I don't want to sound too critical here in a negative way, a lot of these facilities aren't being used properly
They're
now.
grossly underutilized.
Yeah,
we've seen that just around campus here alone, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you've definitely voiced your opinion there, and I tend to agree. I mean, it's a bit of a waste.
Yeah, a swimming pool that's not open is losing money.
Yeah,
That swimming pool should be open from 4 o'clock in the morning till midnight.
yeah,
And having people going in and out, training squads, the casual swimmers, whatever, should be just all the time going, because you have to run those pool filters anyway.
right. And the extra cost is what? Maybe like 3-4 employees?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Well,
Maybe
you're creating employment, which I think is a good thing for any economy, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was talking to you about this a while ago. We see people with menial jobs on campus, pushing water around puddles.
Yeah.
Like, what are they doing? They could be in these facilities, right? I mean, there's a gigantic workforce here.
Absolutely.
That could definitely be part of this.
And if you applied that to some of our other cities where we've seen Olympic venues being abandoned,
Yeah.
just imagine the number of people, and to Myanmar's credit, they employ people to keep the facilities.
Yeah.
They're always being cleaned and painted, and they're keeping them up. Even though they're not
Okay.
being used, they'll maintain them, and they're employing people to do that.
Okay.
Hopefully so they can host another one.
Okay.
Yeah. One day,
That's-
or something else one day.
I guess I had the impression when you were describing the Myanmar situation that they had not done any maintenance.
Well, at least
and-
last time I saw them, they're being well maintained.
Okay,
Maybe
well, that's-
since the problems, who knows?
Okay, well that's something, I guess, right? And maybe they do get to host another Asian Games at some
Yeah.
point.
Or even something bigger. I mean, they could easily host Olympic Games there, actually. They've got most of the facilities that you would need.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we can agree that that's a remote possibility at
Very
best.
remote possibility at this stage, with
But
the political problems. Yeah.
Right, of course, yeah. Political unrest. I'd love to see that too. What I'd really love to see is an Olympic Games hosted by an African nation.
Sure, but
Yeah.
who would be ready to do that? I would struggle to think. Maybe one of the South African cities.
Yep.
If you hold to the city model.
Right.
If you immediately opened up that model and say, no, how about we share this around like football does? It's
Right.
only one sport, but more than one country often shares the hosting.
Well, the World
duties.
Cup, for example, that was happening.
Exactly.
Well, I know the Women's World Cup was in the US and Canada,
Yeah.
the last staging, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
The Olympic Games has this, they're stuck and wedded to this idea that you have to all be in the same place. And all the athletes stay in the village together, and it's all part of that bonding and meeting everybody, which, again, sorry, but this is the early 1900s mentality.
Yeah.
Right? In today's world, the top athletes don't even stay in the village.
Yeah.
They'll come and
Yeah.
stay in a hotel.
Yeah.
So they compete and then fly out.
Yeah, not a smart idea staying in the village if you're a top athlete, right? I mean, for many
And,
reasons.
well, even delegations now will come in and in bits and pieces. In the old days, say up until the 1960s, maybe a bit later, delegations would go because transport was difficult.
Right.
So you'd sail to the Olympics rather than fly. And so,
what was it like
okay.
being on those boats?
Well, it would
like,
have been
I
hard
mean,
work, but
yeah.
but they
You must
got
have
there.
some good memories, though.
Oh yeah. I mean, shuffleboard, and I was good. Darts, I was very good at that stuff.
Oh yeah, like playing dice against the wall, you know.
So you would get to the games and you'd stay the whole games. You would march in the opening ceremony. So you look at in the old days, you see really nice, uniformed, very disciplined, very organized delegations. You don't see that anymore.
Yeah, not really, right?
Everybody's pretty casual now.
Pretty
and
casual. They've got their phones out.
Yeah,
recording
and
everything.
the people who march in the opening ceremony are usually completely different to the people who are in the closing ceremony, because the group that's coming through for the first week of competition will have gone back home, and the group that's come in for the second week of competition will be the ones to do the closing.
Yeah.
So that model, don't need it.
Yeah, not really, I guess, right? I mean, it's for fanfare, right? And it's tradition, obviously, too, right?
Yeah.
And you have everyone walking. You have the flag bearer
Which
walking
I think
in
is
front.
great, and it's a
Yeah.
good feature. But then after that happens, why can't that competition be dispersed?
Yeah.
All right, and then maybe they can then come back and do the closing thing in
Yeah.
one place.
Yeah.
Maybe, personally, I would like to see a different model of the Olympics where actually now most of the continents have some kind of a multi-sport event. The EOC has its European Games. Oceania has its Pacific Games.
Yeah.
Africa has the Pan-African Games.
Yeah, of course. There's
so
the
that-
Pan
so-
Am Games, and
Yeah.
they're right in that region too.
And there's
yeah.
the Asian Games, of course, probably, arguably, even bigger event than the Olympics,
Yeah.
because it's something that Asian countries have really adopted.
Yeah, it's gigantic. I've
It's a
seen
really
yeah,
big event.
TV,
It's a good
yeah.
event. It's
Really
good.
ornate, lots of yeah.
And with some very interesting sports.
Right. Yeah, like a little bit different than the Olympics,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like, can you give me some examples?
Well, sepak takraw and some of the
Oh, yeah.
and silat and some of the kabaddi,
Yeah.
some of these more traditional games are included in and also the Asian Games were the first to trial esport.
Oh yeah, that's right. That was recently, right? The most
Yeah.
recent Asian Games.
Yep. And they also have a number of derivations of the Asian Games. So you have the Asian Indoor Games and the Asian Beach Games and the Asian
Okay.
Games.
I have to say I
Because-
wasn't aware of that. The
Yeah,
Asian
well,
Beach Games.
They do have these things because, once again, like all of the multi-sport events, more and more sports want to be a part.
Right. Yeah.
And so, but rather than make their Asian Games got to the point of being like the Olympics, already strained in terms of size. So their solution was to create more games,
right.
which I think makes sense.
Yeah. Why
Yeah,
not?
the Olympics could do that too. But I personally, I like the model of having the Continental Games being your Olympic qualifiers,
Yeah.
right? Where you've got that, where you can satisfy that objective of having more people involved.
Yeah.
So imagine 5 continents hold an Olympic qualifying event with 10,000 athletes. There's 50,000 athletes.
Yeah,
Right?
for sure.
And then the champions of each continent go to a central location, which could be a permanent location.
Right.
Right.
That's an interesting model, and like, it would be certainly a big shift.
Well, I would
But
like that. I mean,
that'd
if you
be
think the
interesting.
ancient games were like that, they were always held in Olympia.
Right.
So if we had these continental games being held in different places within the continent,
Yeah.
and that could be multi-city or single city, but whatever, the champions then, and it'd be up to each sport to figure out how they figure out the champions, but you
Yeah.
would do that, and then just the champions would go to the games. Then the Olympic Games, there wouldn't be such a huge event, because you'd only have the champions there.
The big events would be the Continental Games.
Yeah,
that you're
exactly.
describing.
Right.
Yeah.
And
That's interesting.
Yeah. Now the critics would say yes, but we're about inclusion, so every country should be represented at the main, the finals. Well, I'm sorry, but the reality is it's not never happens. Even if we've got 207 countries at the games, there'll be 60 countries at least that won't win a medal,
Yeah.
and a substantial percentage of those won't even make the final.
Right. Yeah.
Be any feature anywhere in the finals. So they're there, but they're not there. They appear in the heats of the athletics or the swimming in the morning when no one's watching, so no one sees them anyway.
Yeah.
So why do that, and why humiliate these people anyway by making them go up against these super athletes who are just going to blow them out of the water and destroy any hope that they have of doing this
I
sport.
mean, it seems a little bit humiliating too. And I've heard the argument that it's actually, or like this was by the UK Olympic Association, that it actually devalues participating in the Olympics, having, we'll say, I mean, lesser competitors. Competitors from small nations that have been granted their one athlete.
they're wild
They're
card
they're
athletes,
stipulated one athlete. And that, but I mean, that sort of runs counter to your perception or your idea that the Olympics should be inclusive, and it's really about nations coming together for this big sporting
And they still can.
extravaganza.
There's no reason why a delegation from each country in the world couldn't attend in one form or another those finals where you've got the very best athletes in the world competing. They
Yeah.
can still be there,
Yeah.
but they just wouldn't necessarily have athletes competing. But they could have athletes there observing and learning, and
Yeah.
there could be coach education around that and all sorts of stuff going on that would include them.
Mm-hmm.
But they're just not good enough to be in the final, which they're not good enough anyway.
Yeah.
Right? Or they go to the Olympic Games, they're not in the finals, they're not good enough.
Yeah, you know, I have to say it is a little bit sad for me when I watch, or I guess this is sort of, this would have been like 2012 in London and earlier, because I think they stopped doing this in track and field, but you'd have in the first round of the 100 meters, Beijing 08 and earlier. In the first round of the 100 meters, there were 4 rounds back then. You'd have, athletes from like Mali and from like Vanuatu and those tiny nations competing against like Maurice Green and the Dwayne Chambers.
Yeah.
And it'd be those guys run like 10-2 in the first round, and these athletes run 11-4.
Yeah.
That's
a long way back.
Exactly, right? And maybe that's their national champion, and that's great. I mean, these are small nations that they don't have the like big sporting superpower capacities of the Americas and Britain's and Canada's. But my heart would always go out to those athletes because they're really trying. They're trying really hard, and it looks bad. Like they're getting destroyed, and the top runners are jogging and beating them by a second.
I had personal experience with that. I mean, I used to help prepare these athletes from these small countries to go to the Olympic Games, and quite often you'd get the feedback. Well, the two things would happen. You'd either get an athlete who just really enjoyed that experience, and quite liked the perk of getting a free trip to the Olympics and staying in the village for 2 weeks and eating what they want. And
that's pretty cool, I guess.
It's pretty cool, and you do get to meet some exciting people.
Yeah.
And so great, that's good. I'm not sure you need to be there to compete to do that.
Right.
No, there's no reason an athlete couldn't be granted access to the village for 2 weeks to enjoy the atmosphere and go and watch some training and some competition without having to compete. But I agree. Very often, the other types of athletes, and this was by far the majority, were those that were totally humiliated, who have gone there thinking that they're pretty decent athletes. And this is particularly in track and field. You're a track and field guy yourself. I mean, you know what it's like. You're on the starting block and you hear the gun and off you go. And then when you look up, you see these big athletic bums.
You see butts at
10 meters ahead of you.
I'll tell you, that's the worst
feeling.
Worst feeling on earth, by the way, if you're a sprinter, a 100-meter guy, and you get out of the blocks and you hit about 30 meters and you start to come up and you see butts.
Yeah.
That's a bad sign.
It's a bad sign. And
it's not a good sign.
It's not, and I did feel also very sorry for them. I also had issues with the fact that as the small countries, and working with these small countries for many years, sometimes these athletes are sent to a bigger country like Australia, where they can get good training, use good facilities, get good coaching.
Right.
Again, the theory being, well, that will stimulate them to want to do more, Very often when they come home and they don't have access to those facilities, that coaching, the technology, they quit.
Right, attrition.
So it's a waste of money.
Yeah.
And to me, this was another example of offering programs to people where those countries aren't ready for it. Now, if you have, for example, an established track and field program where you've got national championships and you've got lots of kids competing all the time. And
the National Association too.
Yep, a National Association, well established, very credible, then sure, they should have those things.
Yeah.
But a lot of the countries that get to go to the Olympics don't even have a national championship in that sport, track and field or swimming.
And they kind of elect or appoint athletes to go.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, Eric the Eel was,
Oh, Eddie the Eagle.
Eric the Eel.
Oh, there's Eric the Eagle. There's Eric the Eel.
Well, Eddie the Eagle was actually quite a good skier.
Yeah.
By the way, he was a good cross-country skier.
I thought you had a glitch in your hardware there for a second.
No. Eric the Eel from Equatorial Guinea, a swimmer.
Oh, you told me about this guy.
Who nearly drowned.
Yeah.
He swam the 100 and they were worried whether they should jump. I mean, the poor guy, he had three guys in his race.
Yeah.
And the other two false started, so he had to swim by himself, which made it worse. Because he really couldn't swim. He couldn't physically swim. Well, that then resulted in swimming saying, well, in future, any wild card in swimming has to have attended a swimming world championship.
Okay.
Even if it's as a wild card, but at least then FINA would see them, oh yeah, you can swim, so you wouldn't get that.
There's a hazard there for sure. For swimming, maybe uniquely, I can see there being an issue there, or other sports that present some kind of potential danger to the athlete.
But all of these examples, whether it's selecting a venue or whether it's selecting athletes to attend, or all these things are done with some ideology which is just not valid.
How so?
Right? So, we send these athletes to the Olympics and they'll become stimulated. Well, maybe, but maybe not. And if they are, maybe for the wrong reasons. Right. Maybe because they want a free meal every 4 years for 2 weeks and have a holiday.
Yeah, that's not exactly scientific. If we send them, then that'll stimulate their interest, or they'll be on course to becoming elite world-class athletes, or
Yeah.
it's not really an evidence-based
It really is
strategy.
And the idea that we award a city the Olympic Games and that will improve their sporting infrastructure and they'll be able to build this wonderful sport program around that. There's no evidence to support this.
Except LA, I guess.
There's no
LA
empirical
84.
evidence to suggest that hosting the Olympic Games actually increases participation in the sport. There's been many studies on this. So we know that that's not true. Again, because of readiness.
Right.
All right. So, for example, if you host the World Swimming Championships in a country, and it gets lots of exposure, people are excited about swimming.
Yeah.
But if there's only so many swimming pools and only so much capacity to do swimming, and it's already full, well, how's the hosting the swimming championships going to increase your swimming?
Right.
There's no more capacity. You can't.
That's sound logic. It's just
I'll give you an example from Oceania. In the 1996 Olympic Games, Tonga won a silver medal in boxing.
Yeah, that's right.
The great Paya Wolfgren,
big guy,
fabulous guy, really smart guy, and he was wonderful. Stimulated the country.
Yeah.
Every kid in Tonga, well, not every kid, but most kids, I want to be a boxer.
Yeah.
They like boxing anyway. And up until 1996, Tonga used to send quite full boxing teams to South Pacific Games and to Commonwealth Games even.
So they had some of that.
We had a history in boxing, right?
Yeah.
But after Paya's success, there was so much demand placed on the National Federation to do boxing that most of the people who were, and it was just a very amateur setup. It was very casual.
Okay.
They couldn't handle it, and most of them just quit. And at the next two South Pacific Games, Tonga didn't even send a team to the South Pacific Games, never mind to the Olympics.
Yeah.
So after winning a silver medal, it all fell apart. Now, it hurt me because I was working in Tonga at the time, and it was partly through the work I was doing that got Paya the opportunity to fight at the Olympic Games.
Yep.
And so, and I bought into that idea. Well, if we can get Paya to do something, because he's pretty good.
Yeah.
He'd already won a Commonwealth Games bronze medal.
Oh, that's right.
1994.
Yeah, 94, that's right.
So we knew we had a guy.
Yeah.
And so I was willing to support the NSC to give him the support he needed to prepare for 1996, thinking this will stimulate that sport.
Yeah.
And the result was the opposite. It killed it. It absolutely killed it, dead.
Jeez.
And it was...
How could anyone have predicted that?
Well, yeah, and this is where I'm going, readiness.
Right.
If that organization had boxing venues, had clubs established, had national championships regularly, had all those things, then it might have worked, right? Because there would be something for people to go to and follow that role model.
So were they on the way there before the silver medal came? Were they on the way to establishing these?
No.
Okay, I was going to say maybe it was just bad timing.
There were people on the Tonga Boxing Association who didn't even want Paya to compete. It was very much a personality-based organization. It wasn't actually doing very much for the sport. And apologies to my friends who were there, but you know who you are. They weren't doing enough. They weren't doing the sport enough.
Yeah.
And it got exposed by this very thing. So even the theory that if we send these people to the games, it's going to stimulate back home, no, not necessarily.
It could have the opposite effect, I guess,
have the
right?
opposite effect.
Yikes. Yeah. Boy, is that a cautionary tale.
And so hosting a games too, the Olympic movement had these rules. They are changing, I think. Agenda 2020 and 2020 Plus, as it's called now, is addressing some of these issues. Again, not aggressively enough though, because unfortunately the people who are involved in these things tend to be from European countries or established sports systems.
Yeah.
And they really can't see what the majority of the world's like. I'll put my neck on the line here and say there's only, say, between 40 and 60 countries in the world that have established sports systems.
Right.
And yet there's 207 countries that compete in the Olympics.
Okay, yeah.
Right? So there's a lot of people who are strugglers.
Right, 25% of the nations, maybe like 30%, actually have proper international sports
Well, if you
federations.
do an analysis of the medal winning, you can do this if you like at home. If you're a geek like me that plays with spreadsheets, you'll find that roughly 20% of the nations have won 80% of the medals. and vice versa.
That doesn't surprise me if you look at the medal counts. America, China, Britain,
That's right.
Canada,
You take the
Australia.
top 10 probably even, you don't even have to go to 20%.
Yeah.
The top 5 to 10% of the countries in the world have won almost 80 to 90% of all the medals that have ever been competed for.
That almost sounds like a conservative estimate, like from what I understand. Like if you look at how many medals China and the US are winning now, for example.
That's right.
Yeah, that's probably 90% plus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this one size fits all global sport thing, which is the Olympics, you've got countries that will go and compete in one sport and it'll be on a wild card. And
Yep.
there'll be quite a few of those, there'll be at least 20 of those. In Paris, if you want to do the exercise of looking for them, see if you can find them.
Yeah, and you
Right.
should tune into the Olympics too. The Olympics are the best.
But see if you can even see these guys compete.
Yeah.
And you'll be struggling because it either won't be televised or it'll be at a time where no one's watching anyway.
Right, it'll be like a qualification round that has no real bearing on the outcome of the event.
Yeah.
Like I think of the 100 meters, right? There's qualification round and then there's the first round, right? Like so qualification round then preliminary round. They kind of mean the same thing, preliminary and qualification, but qualification rounds for those athletes, right? The ones that haven't made standard, that have been elected or appointed by their Olympic associations to compete.
Now, again, from a development point of view, I loved it.
Yeah.
I was quite happy to put in place in the countries I worked in programs to get people to start to train and prepare for their opportunity to go to the Olympics.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing, provided that happens.
Yeah.
If you're just getting a situation where we're just going to send that guy,
Yeah.
and there's no real system of preparing that person or selecting that person, then I think it's counterproductive personally.
Yeah.
And I'd say the same thing for selecting who would host the games.
Right.
Right. So Paris, I think, is a great choice because they're a very established
for sure.
nation. Paris, as a city, had at least, I think they built a couple of new facilities or renovated.
They have, yeah. They renovated the Olympic Stadium too,
Yeah.
like their Stade de France, the big
which
one.
is great. It's an iconic venue already, and so they'll make it a bit nicer, hopefully. And
Yeah, they've hosted since then European Championships in track and field and Diamond League events.
Yeah.
Golden League back in the day, and then Diamond League later on.
And so, yeah, let's see. But anyway, that's another day.
It's a story for another day, for sure.
We can talk about that.
It's been a fun one, though. Yeah, this is like, I think they're getting better and better as we go on. Yeah, for sure. We're going to have to add some production value too, and we'll do that along the way. And feel free, we're going to be uploading these videos in various different mediums. Haven't really worked out everything yet, but if you have any comments, leave some comments in our comments section.
Help us out.
Maybe some topics that you'd like to hear about. We're open to different possibilities. I think we have a sort of a queue of about 18 or 20 topics, or something like that right now. But
and getting bigger all the time, because every time we talk about one, we think of another 3 or 4 around that topic.
It's true, right? Yeah, it's been real fun as always. I always have a good time chatting, and I mean, like I said it in the first podcast. Brian and I have these conversations all the time. Like this is we're just, honestly, there are just cameras in front of us now, but I mean, this, like a similar conversation happened yesterday, for example.
We're not doing this for money, so no need to like or subscribe, but do feel free to make those comments just to help us. And hopefully some of these conversations can excite people's interest in sport, either to do research or to think, if you're a sports administrator, maybe I could do things a little bit differently.
Right, that's
maybe I could be looking for a different way to get more effective results. If we can achieve that, I think we'll be more than happy.
Yeah, for sure. That's I feel the exact same way. Yeah. Anyway, so I guess that's it.
That's it for now.
All right.